Welcome to Dweller of the Dark. We are a channel honoring the yellowed and blackened bones of many prominent authors. We will be digging up several obscure, strange, and forgotten authors who influenced many of the great horror, science fiction, and fantasy writers today. More tales of the horrifying, obscure, strange, and forgotten are climbing out of the tombs. Subscribe, comment, like, donate, or I'll send Thaddeus Forge to steal your heathen soul. Unknown horror masters, send us ghoulish delights for the Skull and Bones collection. Your pound of writer's flesh will continue to feed our ghouls for now. Books, websites, podcasts, in the links below. Children of Horror, Legion of Ghouls, tonight. The End of the Story by Clark Ashton Smith. The following narrative was found among the papers of Christophe Morand, a young law student of Tours, after his unaccountable disappearance during a visit at his father's home near Moulins in November 1798. A sinister, brownish-purple autumn twilight, made premature by the imminence of a sudden thunderstorm, had filled the forest of Avron. The trees along my road were already blurred to ebon masses, and the road itself pale and spectral before me in the thickening gloom seemed to waver and quiver slightly as with the tremor of some mysterious earthquake. I spurred my horse, who was woefully tired with a journey begun at dawn and had fallen hours ago to a protesting and reluctant trot, and we galloped adown the darkening road between enormous oaks that seemed to lean toward us with boughs like clutching fingers as we passed. With dreadful rapidity, the night was upon us. The blackness became a tangible, clinging veil. A nightmare confusion and desperation drove me to spur my mount again with a more cruel rigor. And now, as we went, the first far-off mutter of the storm mingled with the clatter of my horse's hoofs, and the first lightning flashes illumined our way, which, to my amazement, since I believed myself on the main highway through Avron, had inexplicably narrowed to a well-trodden footpath, feeling sure that I had gone astray, but not caring to retrace my steps in the teeth of darkness and the towering clouds of the tempest. I hurried on, hoping, as seemed reasonable, that a path so plainly worn would lead eventually to some house or chateau where I could find refuge for the night. My hope was well-founded, for within a few minutes I descried a glimmering light through the forest boughs and came suddenly to an open glade where, on a gentle eminence, a large building loomed with several litten windows in the lower story, and a top that was well nigh indistinguishable against the bulks of driven cloud. Doubtless a monastery, I thought, as I drew rein and, descending from my exhausted mount, lifted the heavy brazen knocker in the form of a dog's head and let it fall on the oaken door. The sound was unexpectedly loud and sonorous, with a reverberation almost sepulchral, and I shivered involuntarily with a sense of startlement, of unwonted dismay. This, a moment later, was wholly dissipated when the door was thrown open and a tall, ruddy-featured monk stood before me in the cheerful glow of the cressets that illumined a capacious hallway. I bid you welcome to the Abbey of Paragon, he said in a suave rumble, and even as he spoke, another robed and hooded figure appeared and took my horse in charge. As I murmured my thanks and acknowledgments, the storm broke, and tremendous gust of rain, accompanied by ever-nearing peals of thunder, drove with demoniac fury on the door that had closed behind me. It is fortunate that you found us when you did, observed my host. 'Twere ill for man and beast to be abroad in such a hell brew. Divining without question that I was hungry as well as tired, he led me to the refectory and set before me a bountiful meal of mutton, brown bread, lentils, and a strong, excellent red wine. He sat opposite me at the refectory table while I ate, and, with my hunger a little mollified, I took occasion to scan him more attentively. He was both tall and stoutly built, and his features, where the brow was no less broad than the powerful jaw, betokened intellect, as well as a love for good living, a certain delicacy and refinement, an air of scholarship, of good taste, and good breeding emanated from him, and I thought to myself, this monk is probably a connoisseur of books as well as of wines. Doubtless my expression betrayed the quickening of my curiosity, for he said, as if in answer, I am Hilaire, the abbot of Paragon. We are a Benedictine order who live in amity with God and with all men, and we do not hold that the spirit is to be enriched by the mortification or impoverishment of the body. We have in our butteries an abundance of wholesome fire, in our cellars the best and oldest vintages of the district of Avron. And if such things interest you, as mayhap they do, we have a library that is stocked with rare tomes, with precious manuscripts, with the finest works of heathendom and Christendom, even to certain unique writings that survived the Holocaust of Alexandria. I appreciate your hospitality, I said, bowing. I am Christophe Morand, a law student on my way home from Tours to my father's estate near Moulins. I, too, am a lover of books, and nothing would delight me more than the privilege of inspecting a library so rich and curious as the one whereof you speak. Forthwith, while I finished my meal, we fell to discussing the classics and to quoting and capping passages from Latin, Greek, or Christian authors. My host, I soon discovered, was a scholar of uncommon attainments, with an erudition, a ready familiarity with both ancient and modern literature that made my own seem as that of the merest beginner by comparison. He, on his part, was so good as to commend my far from perfect Latin, and by the time I had emptied my bottle of red wine, we were chatting familiarly like old friends. All my fatigue had now flown, to be succeeded by a rare sense of well-being, of physical comfort combined with mental alertness and keenness. So, when the abbot suggested that we pay a visit to the library, I assented with alacrity. He led me down a long corridor, on each side of which were cells belonging to the brothers of the order, and unlocked with a huge brazen key that depended from his girdle. The door of a great room with lofty ceiling and several deep-set windows. Truly, he had not exaggerated the resources of the library, for the long shelves were overcrowded with books, and many volumes were piled high on the tables or stacked in corners. There were rolls of papyrus, of parchment, of vellum. There were strange Byzantine or Coptic Bibles. There were old Arabic and Persian manuscripts with floriated or jewel-studded covers. There were scores of incunabula from the first printing presses. There were innumerable monkish copies of antique authors bound in wood or ivory with rich illuminations and lettering that was often in itself a work of art. With the care that was both loving and meticulous, the abbot Hilaire brought out volume after volume for my inspection. Many of them I had never seen before. Some were unknown to me even by fame or rumor. My excited interest, my unfeigned enthusiasm evidently pleased him, for at length he pressed a hidden spring in one of the library tables and drew out a long drawer in which he told me were certain treasures that he did not care to bring forth for the edification or delectation of many, and whose very existence was undreamed of by the monks. Here, he continued, are 3 odes by Catullus, which you will not find in any published edition of his works. Here also is an original manuscript of Sappho, a complete copy of a poem otherwise extant, only in brief fragments. Here are 2 of the lost tales of Miletus, a letter of Pericles to Aspasia, an unknown dialogue of Plato, and an old Arabian work on astronomy by some anonymous author, in which the theories of Copernicus are anticipated. And lastly, here is the somewhat infamous Histoire d'Amour by Bernard de Valancourt, which was destroyed immediately upon publication, and of which only one other copy is known to exist. As I gazed with mingled awe and curiosity on the unique, unheard of treasures he displayed, I saw in one corner of the drawer what appeared to be a thin volume with plain, untitled binding of dark leather. I ventured to pick it up and found that it contained a few sheets of closely written manuscript in Old French. "And this?" I queried, turning to look at Hilaire, whose face, to my amazement, had suddenly assumed a melancholy and troubled expression.
It were better not to ask, my son.
He crossed himself as he spoke, and his voice was no longer mellow, but harsh, agitated, full of a sorrowful perturbation.
There is a curse on the pages
that you hold
in your hand, an evil spell. A malign power is attached to them, and he who would venture to peruse them is henceforward in dire peril, both of body and soul.
He took the little volume from me as he spoke, and returned it to the drawer, again crossing himself carefully as he did so. But, Father, I dared to expostulate. How can such things be? How can there be danger in a few written sheets of parchment?
Christophe, there are things beyond your understanding. Things that it were not well for you to know. The might of Satan is manifestable in devious modes, in diverse manners. There are other temptations than those of the world and the flesh. There are evils no less subtle than irresistible. There are hidden heresies and necromancies other than those which sorcerers practice.
With what, then, are these pages concerned? That such occult peril, such unholy power lurks within them?
I forbid you to ask.
His tone was one of great rigor, with a finality that dissuaded me from further questioning.
For you, my son,
he went on,
the danger would be doubly great, because you are young, ardent, full of desires and curiosities. Believe me, it is better to forget that you have even seen this manuscript.
He closed the hidden drawer, and as he did so, the melancholy, troubled look was replaced by his former benignity.
Now,
he said as he turned to one of the bookshelves,
I will show you the copy of Ovid that was owned by the poet Petrarch.
He was again the mellow scholar, the kindly, jovial host, and it was evident that the mysterious manuscript was not to be referred to again. But his odd perturbation, the dark and awful hints he had let fall, the vague, terrific terms of his proscription had all served to awaken my wildest curiosity. And though I felt the obsession to be unreasonable, I was quite unable to think of anything else for the rest of the evening. All manner of speculations, fantastic, absurd, outrageous, ludicrous, terrible, defiled through my brain as I duly admired the incunabula which Hilaire took down so tenderly from the shelves for my delectation. At last, toward midnight, he led me to my room, a room especially reserved for visitors, and with more of comfort, of actual luxury in its hangings, carpets, and deeply quilted bed than was allowable in the cells of the monks or of the abbot himself. Even when Hilaire had withdrawn, and I had proved for my satisfaction the softness of the bed allotted me, my brain still whirled with questions concerning the forbidden manuscript. Though the storm had now ceased, it was long before I fell asleep. But slumber, when it finally came, was dreamless and profound. When I awoke, a river of sunshine, clear as molten gold, was pouring through my window. The storm had wholly vanished, and no lightest tatter of cloud was visible anywhere in the pale blue October heavens. I ran to the window and peered out on a world of autumnal forest and fields, all a-sparkle with the diamonds of rain. All was beautiful. All was idyllic to a degree that could be fully appreciated only by one who had lived for a long time, as I had, within the walls of a city, with towered buildings in lieu of trees and cobbled pavements where grass should be. But charming as it was, the foreground held my gaze only for a few moments. Then, beyond the tops of the trees, I saw a hill, not more than a mile distant, on whose summit there stood the ruins of some old chateau, the crumbling, broken down condition of whose walls and towers was plainly visible. It drew my gaze irresistibly with an overpowering sense of romantic attraction, which somehow seemed so natural, so inevitable, that I did not pause to analyze or wonder. And once having seen it, I could not take my eyes away, but lingered at the window for how long I knew not, scrutinizing as closely as I could the details of each time-shaken turret and bastion. Some undefinable fascination was inherent in the very form, the extent, the disposition of the pile. Some fascination not dissimilar to that exerted by a strain of music, by a magical combination of words in poetry, by the features of a beloved face. Gazing, I lost myself in reveries that I could not recall afterward, but which left behind them the same tantalizing sense of innominable delight which forgotten nocturnal dreams may sometimes leave. I was recalled to the actualities of life by a gentle knock at my door, and realized that I had forgotten to dress myself. It was the abbot, who came to inquire how I had passed the night, and to tell me that breakfast was ready whenever I should care to arise. For some reason, I felt a little embarrassed, even shamefaced, to have been caught daydreaming. And though this was doubtless unnecessary, I apologized for my dilatoriness. Hilaire, I thought, gave me a keen, inquiring look, which was quickly withdrawn, as, with the suave courtesy of a good host, he assured me that there was nothing whatever for which I need apologize. When I had breakfasted, I told Hilaire, with many expressions of gratitude for his hospitality, that it was time for me to resume my journey. But his regret at the announcement of my departure was so unfeigned, his invitation to tarry for at least another night was so genuinely hearty, so sincerely urgent, that I consented to remain. In truth, I required no great amount of solicitation, for, apart from the real liking I had taken to Hilaire, the mystery of the forbidden manuscript had entirely enslaved my imagination, and I was loath to leave without having learned more concerning it. Also, for a youth with scholastic leanings, the freedom of the abbot's library was a rare privilege, a precious opportunity not to be passed over. I should like, I said, to pursue certain studies while I am here, with the aid of your incomparable collection.
My son, you are more than welcome
To remain for any length of time, and you can have access to my books whenever it suits your need or inclination. So saying, Hilaire detached the key of the library from his girdle and gave it to me.
There are duties,
He went on,
which will call me away from the monastery for a few hours today, and doubtless you will desire to study in my absence.
A little later, he excused himself and departed, with inward felicitations on the longed-for opportunity that had fallen so readily into my hands. I hastened to the library with no thought save to read the proscribed manuscript. Giving scarcely a glance at the laden shelves, I sought the table with the secret drawer and fumbled for the spring. After a little anxious delay, I pressed the proper spot and drew forth the drawer. An impulsion that had become a veritable obsession, a fever of curiosity that bordered upon actual madness, drove me, and if the safety of my soul had really depended upon it, I could not have denied the desire which forced me to take from the drawer the thin volume with plain, unlettered binding. Seating myself in a chair near one of the windows. I began to peruse the pages, which were only 6 in number. The writing was peculiar, with letter forms of a fantasticality I had never met before. And the French was not only old, but well nigh barbarous in its quaint singularity. Notwithstanding the difficulty I found in deciphering them, a mad, unaccountable thrill ran through me at the first words, and I read on with all the sensations of a man who had been bewitched, or who had drunken a philter of bewildering potency. There was no title, no date, and the writing was a narrative which began almost as abruptly as it ended. It concerned one Gerard, Comte de Ventelion, who, on the eve of his marriage to the renowned and beautiful Demoiselle Eleanor Deslices, had met in the forest near his chateau a strange, half-human creature with hoofs and horns. Now Gerard, as the narrative explained, was a knightly youth of indisputably proven valor, as well as a true Christian. So, in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ, he bade the creature stand and give an account of itself. Laughing wildly in the twilight, the bizarre being capered before him and cried,
I am a satyr, and your Christ is no less to me than the weeds that grow on your kitchen middens.
Appalled by such blasphemy, Gerard would have drawn his sword to slay the creature, but again it cried, saying,
Stay, Gerard de Ventelion, and I will tell you a secret, knowing which you will forget the worship of Christ and forget your beautiful bride of tomorrow and turn your back on the world and on the very sun itself with no reluctance and no regret.
Now, albeit half unwillingly, Gerard lent the satyr an ear, and it came closer and whispered to him, and that which it whispered is not known. But before it vanished amid the blackening shadows of the forest, the satyr spoke aloud once more and said,
The power of Christ has prevailed like a black frost on all the woods, the fields, the rivers, the mountains, where abode in their felicity the glad immortal goddesses and nymphs of yore. But still, in the cryptic caverns of earth, in places far underground, like the hell your priest have fabled, there dwells the pagan loveliness. There cry the pagan ecstasies.
And with the last words, the creature laughed again, its wild, unhuman laugh, and disappeared among the darkening boles of the twilight trees. From that moment, a change was upon Gerard de Ventelion. He returned to his chateau with downcast mien, speaking no cheery or kindly word to his retainers, as was his wont, but sitting
or pacing always in silence and scarcely heeding the food that was set before him. Nor did he go that evening to visit his betrothed, as he had promised. But toward midnight, when a waning moon had arisen red as from a bath of blood, he went forth clandestinely by the postern door of the chateau, and followed an old, half-obliterated trail through the woods, found his way to the ruins of the Chateau de Force-Flamme, which stands on a hill opposite the Benedictine Abbey of Bérégon. Now these ruins, said the manuscript, are very old and have long been avoided by the people of the district, for a legendary of immemorial evil clings about them, and it is said that they are the dwelling place of foul spirits, the rendezvous of sorcerers and succubi. But Gerard, as if oblivious or fearless of their ill renown, plunged like one who is devil-driven into the shadow of the crumbling walls, and went with the careful groping of a man who follows some given direction to the northern end of the courtyard. There, directly between and below the two centermost windows, which, it may be, looked forth from the chamber of forgotten châtellens, he pressed with his right foot on a flagstone differing from those about it in being of a triangular form, and the flagstone moved and tilted beneath his foot, revealing a flight of granite steps that went down into the earth. Then, lighting a taper he had brought with him, Gerard descended the steps, and the flagstone swung into place behind him. On the morrow, his betrothed, Eleanor de Lys, and all her bridal train waited vainly for him at the Cathedral of Vaillant, the principal town of Avroin, where the wedding had been set. And from that time his face was beheld by no man, and no vaguest rumor of Gerard de Ventillon or of the fate that befell him has ever passed among the living. Such was the substance of the forbidden manuscript, and thus it ended. As I have said before, there was no date, nor was there anything to indicate by whom it had been written or how the knowledge of the happenings related had come into the writer's possession. But, oddly enough, it did not occur to me to doubt their veracity for a moment, and the curiosity I had felt concerning the contents of the manuscript was now replaced by a burning desire, a thousandfold more powerful, more obsessive, to know the ending of the story and to learn what Gerard de Ventillon had found when he descended the hidden steps. In reading the tale, it had, of course, occurred to me that the ruins of the Chateau de Fosflamme described therein were the very same ruins I had seen that morning from my chamber window. And pondering this, I became more and more possessed by an insane fever, by a frenetic, unholy excitement, returning the manuscript to the secret drawer. I left the library and wandered for a while in an aimless fashion about the corridors of the monastery, chancing to meet there the same monk who had taken my horse in charge the previous evening. I ventured to question him as discreetly and casually as I could regarding the ruins which were visible from the abbey windows. He crossed himself, and a frightened look came over his broad, placid face at my query.
Those ruins are those of the Chateau de Fosflamme,
he replied.
For untold years, men say they have been the haunt of unholy spirits, of witches and demons, and festivals not to be described or even named or held within their walls. No weapon known to man, no exorcism or holy water has ever prevailed against these demons. Many brave cavaliers and monks have disappeared amid the shadows of Fosflamme, never to return. And once, it is told, an abbot of Paragon went thither to make war on the powers of evil. But what befell him at the hands of the succubi is not known or conjectured. Some say that the demons are abominable hags whose bodies terminate in serpentine coils. Others that there are women of more than mortal beauty whose kisses are a diabolic delight that consumes the flesh of men with the fierceness of hellfire. As for me, I know not whether such tales are true, but I should not care to venture within the walls of Fosflamme.
Before he had finished speaking, a resolve had sprung to life, full-born in my mind. I felt that I must go to the Chateau de Fosflamme and learn for myself, if possible, all that could be learned. The impulse was immediate, overwhelming, ineluctable, and even if I had so desired, I could no more have fought against it than if I had been the victim of some sorcerer's infatuation. The proscription of the abbot Hilaire, the strange, unfinished tale in the old manuscript, the evil legendary at which the monk had now hinted, all these, it would seem, should have served to frighten and deter me from such a resolve. But, on the contrary, by some bizarre inversion of thought, they seemed to conceal some delectable mystery, to denote a hidden world of ineffable things, of vague undreamable pleasures that set my brain on fire and made my pulses throb deliriously. I did not know, I could not conceive of what these pleasures would consist, but in some mystical manner, I was as sure of their ultimate reality as the abbot Hilaire was sure of heaven. I determined to go that very afternoon in the absence of Hilaire, who I felt instinctively might be suspicious of any such intention on my part and would surely be inimical toward its fulfillment. My preparations were very simple. I put in my pockets a small taper from my room and the heel of a loaf of bread from the refectory, and making sure that a little dagger, which I always carried, was in its sheath, I left the monastery forthwith. Meeting two of the brothers in the courtyard, I told them I was going for a short walk in the neighboring woods. They gave me a jovial pax vobiscum and went upon their way in the spirit of the words, heading as directly as I could for False Flam, whose turrets were often lost behind the high and interlacing boughs. I entered the forest. There were no paths, and often I was compelled to brief detours and divagations by the thickness of the underbrush. In my feverish hurry to reach the ruins, it seemed hours before I came to the top of the hill which False Flam surmounted, but probably it was little more than 30 minutes. Climbing the last declivity of the boulder-strewn slope, I came suddenly within view of the chateau, standing close at hand in the center of the level table which formed the summit. Trees had taken root in its broken-down walls, and the ruinous gateway that gave on the courtyard was half choked by bushes, brambles, and nettle plants. Forcing my way through, not without difficulty, and with clothing that had suffered from the bramble thorns, I went, like Gerard de Ventalon in the old manuscript, to the northern end of the court. Enormous, evil-looking weeds were rooted between the flagstones, rearing their thick and fleshy leaves that had turned to dull, sinister maroons and purples with the onset of autumn. But I soon found the triangular flagstone indicated in the tale, and without the slightest delay or hesitation, I pressed upon it with my right foot. A mad shiver, a thrill of adventurous triumph that was mingled with something of trepidation leaped through me when the great flagstone tilted easily beneath my foot, disclosing dark steps of granite, even as in the story. Now, for a moment, the vaguely hinted horrors of the monkish legends became eminently real in my imagination, and I paused before the black opening that was to engulf me, wondering if some satanic spell had not drawn me thither to perils of unknown terror and inconceivable gravity. Only for a few instants, however, did I hesitate. Then the sense of peril faded. The monkish horrors became a fantastic dream, and the charm of things unformulable, but ever closer at hand, always more readily attainable, tightened about me like the embrace of amorous arms. I lit my taper. I descended the stair, and even as behind Gerard de Ventelon, the triangular block of stone silently resumed its place in the paving of the court above me. Doubtless, it was moved by some mechanism operable by a man's weight on one of the steps. But I did not pause to consider its modus operandi, or to wonder if there were any way by which it could be worked from beneath to permit my return. There were perhaps a dozen steps, terminating in a low, narrow, musty vault that was void of anything more substantial than ancient, dust-encumbered cobwebs. At the end, a small doorway admitted me to a second vault that differed from the first only in being larger and dustier. I passed through several such vaults and then found myself in a long passage or tunnel, half blocked in places by boulders or heaps of rubble that had fallen from the crumbling sides. It was very damp and full of the noisome odor of stagnant waters and subterranean mold. My feet splashed more than once in little pools, and drops fell upon me from above, fetid and foul, as if they had oozed from a charnel. Beyond the wavering circle of light that my taper maintained, it seemed to me that the coils of dim and shadowy serpents slithered away in the darkness at my approach. But I could not be sure whether they really were serpents or only the troubled and retreating shadows seen by an eye that was still unaccustomed to the gloom of the vaults. Rounding a sudden turn in the passage, I saw the last thing I had dreamt of seeing: the gleam of sunlight at what was apparently the tunnel's end. I scarcely know what I had expected to find, but such an eventuation was somehow altogether unanticipated. I hurried on in some confusion of thought and stumbled through the opening to find myself blinking in the full rays of the sun. Even before I had sufficiently recovered my wits and my eyesight to take note of the landscape before me, I was struck by a strange circumstance. Though it had been early afternoon when I entered the vaults, and though my passage through them could have been a matter of no more than a few minutes, the sun was now nearing the horizon. There was also a difference in its light, which was both brighter and mellower than the sun I had seen above Avroyne, and the sky itself was intensely blue, with no hint of autumnal pallor. Now, with ever-increasing stupefaction, I stared about me and could find nothing familiar or even credible in the scene upon which I had emerged. Contrary to all reasonable expectation, there was no semblance of the hill upon which false Flam stood, or of the adjoining country, but around me was a placid land of rolling meadows, through which a golden gleaming river meandered toward a sea of deepest azure that was visible beyond the tops of laurel trees. But there are no laurel trees in Avron, and the sea is hundreds of miles away. Judge then my complete confusion and dumbfoundment. It was a scene of such loveliness as I have never before beheld. The meadow grass at my feet was softer and more lustrous than emerald velvet, and was full of violets and many-colored asphodels. The dark green of ilex trees was mirrored in the golden river, and far away I saw the pale gleam of a marble acropolis on a low summit above the plain. All things bore the aspect of a mild and clement spring that was verging upon an opulent summer. I felt as if I had stepped into a land of classic myth, of Grecian legend, and moment by moment, all surprise, all wonder as to how I could have come there, was drowned in a sense of ever-growing ecstasy before the utter, ineffable beauty of the landscape. Nearby, in a laurel grove, a white roof shone in the late rays of the sun. I was drawn toward it by the same allurement, only far more potent and urgent, which I had felt on seeing the forbidden manuscript and the ruins of false Flam. Here, I knew with an esoteric certainty, was the culmination of my quest, the reward of all my mad and perhaps impious curiosity. As I entered the grove, I heard laughter among the trees, blending harmoniously with the low murmur of their leaves in a soft, balmy wind. I thought I saw vague forms that melted among the boles at my approach, and once a shaggy, goat-like creature with human head and body ran across my path, as if in pursuit of a flying nymph. In the heart of the grove, I found a marble palace with a portico of Doric columns. As I neared it, I was greeted by 2 women in the costume of ancient slaves, and though my Greek is of the meagerest, I found no difficulty whatever in comprehending their speech, which was of Attic purity. "Our mistress, Nycea, awaits you," they told me. I could no longer marvel at anything, but accepted my situation without question or surmise, like one who resigns himself to the progress of some delightful dream. Probably, I thought, it was a dream, and I was still lying in my bed at the monastery. But never before had I been favored by nocturnal visions of such clarity and surpassing loveliness. The interior of the palace was full of a luxury that verged upon the barbaric, and which evidently belonged to the period of Greek decadence, with its intermingling of Oriental influences. I was led through a hallway gleaming with onyx and polished porphyry, into an opulently furnished room where, on a couch of gorgeous fabrics, there reclined a woman of goddess-like beauty. At sight of her, I trembled from head to foot with the violence of a strange emotion. I had heard of the sudden mad loves by which men are seized on beholding for the first time a certain face and form, but never before had I experienced a passion of such intensity, such all-consuming ardor as the one I conceived immediately for this woman. Indeed, it seemed as if I had loved her for a long time, without knowing that it was she whom I loved, and without being able to identify the nature of my emotion or to orient the feeling in any manner. She was not tall, but was formed with exquisite voluptuous purity of line and contour. Her eyes were of a dark sapphire blue, with molten depths into which the soul was fain to plunge as into the soft abysses of a summer ocean. The curve of her lips was enigmatic, a little mournful, and gravely tender as the lips of an antique Venus. Her hair, brownish rather than blonde, fell over her neck and ears and forehead in delicious ripples confined by a plain fillet of silver. In her expression there was a mixture of pride and voluptuousness, of regal imperiousness and feminine yielding. Her movements were all as effortless and graceful as those of a serpent.
"I knew you would come,"
she murmured in the same soft-voweled Greek I had heard from the lips of her servants.
"I have waited for you long, but when you sought refuge from the storm in the Abbey of Paragon and saw the manuscript in the secret drawer, I knew that the hour of your arrival was at hand. Ah! You did not dream that the spell which drew you so irresistibly, with such unaccountable potency, was the spell of my beauty, the magical allurement of my love."
"Who are you?" I queried. I spoke readily in Greek, which would have surprised me greatly an hour before, but now I was prepared to accept anything whatever, no matter how fantastic or preposterous, as part of the miraculous fortune, the unbelievable adventure which had befallen me.
"I am Nycea,"
she replied to my question.
"I love you, and the hospitality of my palace and of my arms is at your disposal. Need you know anything more?"
The slaves had disappeared. I flung myself beside the couch and kissed the hand she offered me, pouring out protestations that were no doubt incoherent, but were nevertheless full of an ardor that made her smile tenderly. Her hand was cool to my lips, but the touch of it fired my passion. I ventured to seat myself beside her on the couch, and she did not deny my familiarity, while a soft purple twilight began to fill the corners of the chamber. We conversed happily, saying over and over again all the sweet, absurd litanies, all the felicitous nothings that come instinctively to the lips of lovers. She was incredibly soft in my arms, and it seemed almost as if the completeness of her yielding was unhindered by the presence of bones in her lovely body. The servants entered noiselessly, lighting rich lamps of intricately carven gold, and setting before us a meal of spicy meats, of unknown savorous fruits, and potent wines. But I could eat little, and while I drank, I thirsted for the sweeter wine of Nycea's mouth. I do not know when we fell asleep, but the evening had flown like an enchanted moment. Heavy with felicity, I drifted off on a silken tide of drowsiness, and the golden lamps and the face of Nycea blurred in a blissful mist and were seen no more. Suddenly, from the depths of a slumber beyond all dreams, I found myself compelled into full wakefulness. For an instant, I did not even realize where I was, still less what had aroused me. Then I heard a footfall in the open doorway of the room, and peering across the sleeping head of Nycea, saw in the lamplight the abbot Hilaire, who had paused on the threshold. A look of absolute horror was imprinted upon his face, and as he caught sight of me, he began to gibber in Latin, in tones where something of fear was blended with fanatical abhorrence and hatred. I saw that he carried in his hands a large bottle and an aspergillus. I felt sure that the bottle was full of holy water, and, of course, divined the use for which it was intended. Looking at Nycea, I saw that she too was awake, and knew that she was aware of the abbot's presence. She gave me a strange smile, in which I read an affectionate pity, mingled with the reassurance that a woman offers a frightened child. "Do not fear for me," she whispered.
"The vampire, accursed lamia, she-serpent of hell,"
thundered the abbot suddenly as he crossed the threshold of the room, raising the aspergillus aloft. At the same moment, Nycea glided from the couch with an unbelievable swiftness of motion and vanished through an outer door that gave upon the forest of laurels. Her voice hovered in my ear, seeming to come from an immense distance. "Farewell for a while, Christophe, but have no fear. You shall find me again if you are brave and patient." As the words ended, the holy water from the aspergillum fell on the floor of the chamber and on the couch where Nycea had lain beside me. There was a crash as of many thunders, and the golden lamps went out in a darkness that seemed full of falling dust, of raining fragments. I lost all consciousness, and when I recovered, I found myself lying on a heap of rubble in one of the vaults I had traversed earlier in the day, with a taper in his hand and an expression of great solicitude, of infinite pity upon his face. Hilaire was stooping over me. Beside him lay the bottle and the dripping aspergillum.
I thank God, my son, that I found you in good time,
he said.
When I returned to the abbey this evening and learned that you were gone, I surmised all that had happened. I knew you had read the accursed manuscript in my absence and had fallen under its baleful spell, as have so many others, even to a certain Reverend Abbot, one of my predecessors. All of them, alas, beginning hundreds of years ago with Gerard de Ventelon, have fallen victims to the lamia who dwells in these vaults.
The lamia? I questioned, hardly comprehending his words.
Yes, my son, the beautiful Nycea who lay in your arms this night is a lamia, an ancient vampire who maintains in these noisome vaults her palace of beatific illusions. How she came to take up her abode at Horrorflam is not known, for her coming antedates the memory of men. She is old as paganism. The Greeks knew her. She was exorcised by Apollonius of Tyana, and if you could behold her as she really is, you would see, in lieu of her voluptuous body, the folds of a foul and monstrous serpent. All those whom she loves and admits to her hospitality, she devours in the end, after she has drained them of life and vigor with the diabolic delight of her kisses. The laurel-wooded plain you saw, the ilex-bordered river, the marble palace and all the luxury therein were no more than a satanic delusion, a lovely bubble that arose from the dust and mold of immemorial death, of ancient corruption. They crumbled at the kiss of the holy water I brought with me when I followed you. But Nycea, alas, has escaped, and I fear she will still survive to build again her palace of demoniacal enchantments, to commit again and again the unspeakable abomination of her sins.
Still, in a sort of stupor at the ruin of my newfound happiness, at the singular revelations made by the abbot, I followed him obediently as he led the way through the vaults of Horrorflam. He mounted the stairway by which I had descended, and as he neared the top and was forced to stoop a little, the great flagstone swung upward, letting in a stream of chill moonlight. We emerged, and I permitted him to take me back to the monastery. As my brain began to clear, and the confusion into which I had been thrown resolved itself, a feeling of resentment grew apace, a keen anger at the interference of Hilaire, unheedful whether or not he had rescued me from dire physical and spiritual perils. I lamented the beautiful dream of which he had deprived me. The kisses of Nycea burned softly in my memory, and I knew that whatever she was, woman or demon or serpent, there was no one in all the world who could ever arouse in me the same love and the same delight. I took care, however, to conceal my feelings from Hilaire, realizing that a betrayal of such emotions would merely lead him to look upon me as a soul that was lost beyond redemption. On the morrow, pleading the urgency of my return home, I departed from Bérégon. Now, in the library of my father's house near Moulins, I write this account of my adventures. The memory of Nycea is magically clear, ineffably dear, as if she were still beside me. And still I see the rich draperies of a midnight chamber, illumined by lamps of curiously carven gold. And still I hear the words of her farewell. Have no fear. You shall find me again if you are brave and patient. Soon I shall return to visit again the ruins of the Chateau de Fausflon and redescend into the vaults below the triangular flagstone. But in spite of the nearness of Bérégon to Fausflon, in spite of my esteem for the abbot, my gratitude for his hospitality, and my admiration for his incomparable library, I shall not care to revisit my friend Hilaire. Thank you for listening.
Have a great night.